Yes, for people who don't know that much about it, it was a long-standing, went on for several years, investigation by 5 prosecutors in Wisconsin into what they suspected was campaign finance violations by the personal campaign committee of Scott Walker, the governor, and outside groups, outside so-called dark money groups that he was working very closely with. And as I said, it went on for several years. It has sort of roiled the politics of Wisconsin in that time. It's become a cause célèbre in the state. But what grabbed us about a set of leaked documents that we were given, 1,500 pages of them in all, was that we thought it told a much wider story about what is happening right across America, which is the really pervasive and, for some people, invasive and sort of suspect intrusion and influence of corporate money in the political process. And that's what we tried to sort of focus on. What the leaked documents we were given tells us about the state of American democracy today.
So, for example, what did you learn?
Well, I don't think many of your readers will find any of this surprising, but what's significant is that this huge stash of documents provides us with, really close-up material for which researchers can and people interested in politics can explore for themselves. We've posted all the documents on our website. We've lightly redacted them to remove private information like cell phone numbers, but otherwise it's all there for anyone who wants to see it. You can go in and you can do your own research on it. So, in the spirit of open journalism, we wanted people to be able to draw their own conclusions about this. But what it does do is talks to a story that we've been hearing very loudly on the presidential campaign trail this year, not least from Bernie Sanders, but also surprisingly from Donald Trump, which is the theme that corporate money is distorting the democratic process.
Right.
Post Citizens United in 2010, the Supreme Court ruling that unleashed corporate money in the political process, I think most people have concentrated on super PACs, thinking that's where the money's going. What we found in these documents was that quite a lot of the big ethical questions about modern democracy in America are not going into super PACs, which have to disclose their sources of income. They're going through 501c4s, which are these so-called dark money groups that are meant to be non-political, non-partisan. They're meant to be social welfare organizations. As a result, they're tax-exempt, and they do not have to disclose their money. And we found that millions of dollars of donations from super wealthy individuals, as well as big businesses, are going into these organizations, and through them, they're being used to influence elections.
Are these groups like Americans for Prosperity and these groups that are running ads all over the country?
That's right. They've been proliferating in the last 5 years. Citizens United happened in 2010, and in the last 6 years, it was not that Citizens United itself allowed this proliferation to happen. It's more that Citizens United created an environment, created an atmosphere in which it was felt okay to do pretty much anything.
Well, they sort of fine-tuned and redefined the parameters of the 1976 Buckley decision, which was the first time, from the George Washington administration until 1976, the giving of money to politicians, political campaigns, or even to media for the purpose of influencing politics was considered a behavior that could be regulated. It was lightly regulated, but it was a behavior that could be regulated. And the Supreme Court in 76 in the Buckley case said, no, it's not a behavior, it's free speech, which is protected by the First Amendment. And then Citizens United said, and here's some parameters within which you can do that. And they expanded it considerably. You're absolutely right. What were people saying in these emails? Do you have some examples you could share?
Yeah, a lot of them concern how Scott Walker and his personal campaign committee and team went out across the country, fanned out across the country, looking for big super wealthy individuals to get donations from. This was in 2011 and 12 when, if you recall, he and his fellow Republican senators were facing recall elections in the backlash to his anti-union legislation, Act 10, which became itself a national cause célèbre. And he was going around the country. His fundraiser advised him quite pointedly, corporations go heavy after them to give, take Coke's money, get on a plane to Vegas and sit down with Sheldon Adelson, ask for $1 million now. And, that's just sort of one of the comments. A lot of them are in that similar vein. It's pretty sort of unpolished, unvarnished, an insight into how modern politicians go after big money. And although it's Scott Walker in Wisconsin that is the focus of these documents, Scott Walker's campaign committee and Wisconsin, I should say that, this is probably happening all across the country by politicians, not only of the Republican hue. I think Democratic politicians are also up to it. And they have to be, because if you're not, you're going to get outgunned and outvoted and outspent in the media markets that now increasingly dominate elections. So, as you say, the Supreme Court sort of unleashed that, and I think what we're now seeing, and these documents show us how it's happening, we're seeing the fallout of that, how the electoral process is increasingly being dictated by corporate money. And, I think we deliberated long and hard about whether we should publish these leaked documents. They are held under seal by the Wisconsin Supreme Court. At one point, the court actually ordered the documents to be destroyed. So, we knew we were doing something serious here, but we said to ourselves, what could be possibly more in the public interest than the issue of the health of the American democracy?
Absolutely. And the Wisconsin Supreme Court ordering these documents to be destroyed, that Supreme Court had been highly politicized by the Walker administration. They had worked very aggressively to get and their billionaire buddies and these think tanks and groups and whatnot to get several members off that court and other people on that court who would be favorable to their point of view, if I remember correctly.
That's correct. And the documents give more information on this. It shows how exactly the same network of Scott Walker's campaign committee, his advisors, outside lobby groups, these 501c4 supposedly nonpartisan groups, and big donors, they all came together yet again in order to help conservative justices on the Wisconsin Supreme
So arguably
Court
the Supreme Court in saying destroy the documents was covering their own butts.
I think that's a reasonable argument to make, and yet when two of the conservative justices on the court who had been helped to win their elections through the same network, they both refused to recuse themselves in deliberating on whether to shut down the John Doe investigation. And they voted to shut it down. And they also voted to destroy the documents from which the new information I've just quoted at you comes from. So It is a kind of bafflingly circular thing. And the more you look into it, the more you kind of go, wow, this is kind of weird. Things are going round and round in ever tighter circles. Circular
is a rather values-neutral word. I mean, isn't this corruption?
We don't say that corruption happened here because, as I said earlier, we think it's partly for the reader to make up their own mind.
Sure.
And legally, it's the case that no charges have been brought and no one has formally been accused of corruption. Right. What we do point out, though, is that the U.S. Supreme Court itself, in Citizens United itself, its 2010 ruling, makes clear that it's not just corruption that must be avoided in campaign finance law, it's also any appearance of corruption, because even an appearance of corruption can disturb the public's faith in democracy, and it makes that point very, very clearly. Now,
but that was in John Paul Stevens' dissent. That wasn't in the decision itself, was it?
It is actually Paul Kennedy himself.
Oh, it was Kennedy. Okay.
Who wrote the Citizens United judgment. He says it himself.
That was in the context of his calling for greater transparency, the voluntary transparency, as I recall.
Well, he says that he extends First Amendment rights of free speech, so-called, to corporations, treats them as individuals, and that's why Citizens United is so controversial. It says corporations are essentially people, and therefore they must have the right to spend any amount of money they want on elections. But he also says, and this part has got rather lost in the debate about Citizens United, he also says that it's crucial that any money they give must be independent and totally separate from the politicians that they are seeking to help. There must be no coordination, there must be no contact. And we ask the question, we don't give a firm answer because I think it is open to considerable debate, but we ask the question, was that rule set down by the U.S. Supreme Court breached in Wisconsin in these recall elections?
Right, and then you've got the larger problem of who's willing to prosecute this. The Federal Election Commission is paralyzed by 3 Republicans, 3 Democrats, and the Republicans.
Precisely. There's nothing coming from the federal agency that's in charge of preserving the health of elections in America. Nothing at all at the moment.
Yeah.
Prosecutions are extremely rare, and when they happen, as we've seen in Wisconsin, they're often shut down before they even reach a conclusion.
Yep.
And that's why we thought the documents that we were leaked were so unique and so important, because they actually take you inside that world.
I agree.
Let you see it for yourself and make your judgment for yourself.
Ed Pilkington, hang on just a second, Ed. Pilkington, the chief reporter for Guardian US. TheGuardian.com is the website. You have to read this article. Leaked documents reveal secretive influence of corporate cash. Thank you, Ed.